about for a long time, and I don't know. At our research meeting, I as I said, I was really actually grateful for what Jessica said about um, I don't know, just thinking that some of us are coming with this sense of like we are just here to because we have the vote or whatever. I don't remember how you put it, but I think when you name it, now we can acknowledge it, deal with it. And so I would like to start this meeting with some norms and see if we agree with them. Um, I don't know if they'll change anything, but it can't hurt, is what I figured. So actually, I didn't plan this, but this is my sense. Why don't we go to gallery view so we can all see each other? You may already be there, but I'm not. And I'm just going to read 3 norms and then I'll show them to you so you can look at them, okay? But just so we're sort of looking at each other while I read them. So the first one is to invite and value different opinions, understandings, and offerings. And my thought with that is that, again, what I said yesterday, that, or Wednesday, I really do think that the differences we bring to our discussions, our differences in knowledge, experience, opinions is our strength, and that we are not currently optimizing that strength. And I think we can. So that's what I'm offering with that. The second one is to give one another the benefit of the doubt. And by that, I mean that we are here for our constituents. So whatever it is we're arguing, that it's with our constituents in mind. And then the third one is that we take a stance of curiosity. And this is sort of another way of saying what I put in the chat box on Wednesday, which is that we are open to being changed. So if something that someone says kind of strikes you as, wrong or something, that instead of assuming it's wrong, like thinking, why does that resonate with you? I'm curious about what it is that's there for that person. So I am going to now share my screen so that you can see those. And then if you have any thoughts, questions, or things that come up, can I share my screen? Am I the host?
I am the host, but I can make you the presenter to share your screen.
Thank you. Hi, Zach.
Hi, sorry for being late.
How's the new place?
It's great. Hold on one second. How do I do this? Or I guess it's laptop. Well, I'm still decorating, but it's coming together.
Oh, nice.
Damn, you're moving on up, man.
Good light. Good luck.
Yeah, you can see. I don't have a shot to the Capitol, but I at least have a shot to the Union Market and everything. This
I was gonna say, I feel like you can fix from that Ward 5.
Jessica, you will love this. I am literally on the parking line of Ward 6 and 5.
I recognize that view very much. It's always what I tell people when they're like, wait, where does Ward 6 end? I'm like, in Union Market, you're in Ward 5.
Yes.
Looking across the street at Union Market, you are in.
So take this as, yeah, I wanted to get as close to Ward 6 as possible.
It's a nice place.
I can't
say more money does.
Oh, sorry.
So Emily, if you go to the top of your screen where it says share and then share content, you should be able to then pick whatever program that you're intending to share.
Top of, see, I guess I'm forgetting I'm not in Zoom, so this is not exactly the same as it.
So in in WebEx, at the top of the screen where it has file, edit, and share. You see that? It may be different because I'm on a Mac, so.
I don't see that. Let's see, make participant presenter. So I do have that. Start private chat. Floating panel view.
No. So at the very, very top, are you on a Mac or on Dell?
I'm on Mac.
Okay. So at the very, very top where the Apple is.
Oh, yeah.
where it says, does it say WebEx meetings?
Yes. Oh,
Edit share.
oh,
There you go.
edit, share. Oh,
And then share content.
sorry. Yeah, that's different. Okay, got it. So wait, now you can see my screen?
Yes, we can see the WebEx. So when you do share content, another box should pop up, and you pick which program you want to share. So right now,
I'm glad it's just you guys right now. This is embarrassing. All right. Sorry. No offense.
so share content, and there you go. And then did a box pop up so you could pick which content to share?
A box. You're sharing your meeting window. Oh, so you can see what I see.
Yes.
And
But
now,
if you do share content rather than share my meeting window,
in the, okay, share my meeting. I don't see,
so it's the first one. So
it's not
let me make
option.
sure-
That is an option. It's not,
Yeah,
it's,
let me make sure. I'm just gonna make you the host and see if that will help.
it says share multimedia.
That might work. Try that.
It's a URL.
So on mine, it actually has that
You know,
option.
you know what we
picked.
could do instead of sharing is if we all go to the shared document, the Google Doc.
Sure. Do you want to put the Google Doc link in the chat?
Yeah. Good idea. All right. Sorry, guys. Oops, that's to you. Okay.
Awesome. And you also want to unselect your sharing so that we're back in the gallery view.
Okay. Did that work? No, stop sharing. I see it. Okay.
There you go.
All right. And then I'm going to drop these 3 things just at the top here. So there you go. And now we're kind of, 10 minutes in. So just any thoughts? Do these resonate with you? Do you have others you'd like to add? Do they not make, is there anything that doesn't make sense? Jessica.
Thanks, Emily. So I like very much these norms. I especially like the take a stance of curiosity. And I think having norms is a good idea. Sort of adding on to what I said the other day, I think what is hard for me is that I guess I don't feel like members of the board often give me the benefit of the doubt. And I'm going to use a specific example. I was the only candidate endorsed by DFER who won. I find their tactics in the recent election awful. I called Raman Taheri and told him so. I called Shavar Jeffries and told him so. And I did so because as an insider, I wanted them to hear me say it to their faces.
Good.
Watching Ruth tweet about getting money outside money out of DC elections on Matt Furman's tweet about DFER feels like I am being personally subtweeted in the public view by the president of our board. So it is very hard to believe that I am given the benefit of the doubt on my own thoughts and ideas and beliefs, stances on education policy, when members of our board publicly engage in critique about things that I have been part of, about organizations that have endorsed me, and the list would go on, right? Like it's not just about DFER, and I don't want anyone to see this as a DFER commentary, but there are things that I bring to the board that I often seen really sort of snarkily portrayed publicly. And while my mentioned, it is clear that these views are held by members of our board with sort of disdain for things that I work on, I care about, I am part of. So I like the norms, but I don't necessarily feel like we have to this point embodied them. And I don't necessarily believe that we can embody them if we can't honestly have conversation as board members about our opinions on policy matters being taken seriously if folks think that we're corporate shills, shall we say, which is a term that often gets thrown around about me. So.
Me too, if it's Ron.
Wait, who's that? Sorry. Oh,
Zachary
Zach.
said that about Ron Thompson.
I'm sorry, that was inappropriate.
Can I just weigh in really quickly too to note that the I don't know. I'm trying to figure out a way to say this diplomatically, but this is, going to be a recorded meeting, so I would urge all members not to make not to name names type thing. However, I think it is an important point that has been being raised about how we as members or how you as members treat each other, and I really do enjoy the idea of the curiosity, Emily, a lot. I really like that, and I think I may bring that back to our staff conversations as well, as like, how do we approach things with curiosity for things that we don't necessarily hold true or are interesting for our own experience. One of the things that I thought was fascinating, and I think Zachary, it was you or maybe it was Marcus who was talking about the first time that you had a white teacher. That resonated with me because I've only had one teacher of color in my entire life.
Wow.
And that was in college. And it was my professor of urban politics, which we all recognize what the name urban is in this context too, right? But he was a professor at Baylor University and he just retired this year. He, I think, was the only professor of color in the political science department for at least 30 something years. And so that really resonated with me. And I'm really thinking that is in my brain a lot. So I don't mean to go off on a tangent, but I do want to note that like this, I like this idea of this norming process, and especially talking about the curiosity piece. So I apologize for interrupting.
No, thank you for sharing that, actually, both of you. I know that our time is precious and that we have a lot to get through, but I actually think this is really important because I do think that as I said before, our productivity has great potential because of who we are and what we bring, and that we are not optimizing that. So let's do this. Let's talk about this. Ruth, did you have your hand up? Ruth? Can't hear you. Huh. She looks like she's unmuted, but I can't hear her.
Emily, while we wait on Ruth, I would just say I think it's a good call to spend some time here. I know we're talking about like norms as it relates to this committee, but I also wonder how we might be able to bring this back to the broader board. Because I think Jessica's points are well taken. I would say, I hate that you feel that way, Jessica. That has never dawned on me that you felt that way. And I also am acutely aware that there are dynamics amongst board members, publicly even, that are a bit snarky, if you will, that we could just benefit from having a broader conversation. So I don't know what the best avenue or vehicle is for that. I actually don't think maybe we should hammer it out in a working session. So maybe we have another retreat coming up, John Paul, or a board call or some sort. I don't know.
I think that's we can certainly talk about how to do that, and I think it may and this is, we have not talked about this clearly in anything beyond that about what the next retreat type environment would be, but it does make sense actually to have something potentially in the late summer, early fall, to discuss like everything that's gone on and how are we going to approach this over the next year or so with this new thing. So maybe I'll suggest to leadership who are on the call now that at our next meeting on Monday, we discuss like when and how a retreat type environment might happen to have that kind of conversation. I mean, I think with any of those types of conversation, oh, hi puppy. I think with any type of conversation like that, it's always better to be in the room, but it's also harder to be in the room, right? To actually say what needs to be said to someone's face is a lot harder than in a virtual environment. So I'll note that, but yeah, I think I will put that on the agenda for our next conversation with leadership.
Thank you. I think that's a great idea. Thank you, Zachary. Any other thoughts? Ruth, were you able to figure out your audio? Oh, no. I think you're going to have to just use the chat box, Ruth. Or like signs.
She said she's going out and coming back in.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Anything else? If not, maybe we should move on to the equity framework. Okay. Zach, do you want to lead us through that? Okay, now I'm muted.
Can I try? Can anyone hear me now?
Yeah. Did you want to make a comment about the norms?
Yeah. Let me just say I also appreciate the talking about the norms, and I also and I agree with them. The one thing I want to say about the point was made about me and calling out the DFR thing. I do just want to say I was looking in my profile. I think that I did it on my personal account. Although I can't quite figure that out. I certainly meant to. And the other thing is that I think there does need to be some room for people who have independent opinions. And I make a point of trying not to, I don't think I weigh in on that kind of thing a lot. So just wanted to say that, but I appreciate understanding that it was hurtful to raise that I thought it was a problem. And that's it. And I like the norms.
Yeah. I mean, I would just say before moving on that Jessica, I appreciate you sharing that with us, and I think it's a vulnerable place to be in a working session, and that we don't often make space for that. And so I just want to acknowledge that. And, you know, I think that, you know, because we come from such different places, again, that's a strength, but it's also, you know, obviously has potential for insulting each other. And maybe if we are able to name that, even if it's just like saying to the person who has said something, you know, that just felt hurtful to me. Maybe not in the meeting, but at some point.
Yeah, I totally get that. I think one of the things I am always curious about meeting norms, and I was just trying to design some for discussion for the Social Studies Advisory Committee, is that it's important that the norms be set for when you're in the room together doing the work. But what I don't want to do is set norms for us in meetings that then don't apply to us as people. So the notion of tweeting from a personal account versus tweeting from an official account certainly has official implications. But I think the point is, I respect all of you as people, and I respect you as my colleagues. I want to speak about you and with you always with an air of respect. And when I don't do that, I expect that people will tell me so. But I hope I would do that in a meeting, out of a meeting, on Twitter via an official or personal account, because I think that's a way I would hope to conduct myself.
I would just offer, and then I do think we should move on unless it's explosive. I would just offer that it is possible to, you know, and I have experienced this personally, so I'll just speak for myself. I have both been critical of an organization or a concept or idea and still respected the people who are associated with it all the time, right? And now that I'm on the board and I'm meeting so many more people, it's, you know, even more true. So I just put that out there that, you know, I completely respect all of you. I really do. And I hope that you believe that, regardless of what I might say on my Twitter or in a meeting about organizations that you associate with or ideas that you hold dear, that they are not, that I may disagree with that, but it doesn't reflect how I feel about you as a person, as an intellect, as somebody who brings value to our discussions. So,
Not to belabor the point, but I do think this is important because this does shape not only how we work together here, but the board. I will say, again, it was a blind spot to me. I read the comments that our colleagues wrote. I won't mention names. And I didn't necessarily make the connection, Jessica, that I think you're making, understandably so. And then now I'm reflecting on my own past experiences when, for instance, someone attacks Teach for America, and to my knowledge, I may be the only TFA person on the board. I'm like, wait, is that directed at me? And so I totally get it. Although at that time, I don't think that was top of mind. And then there was another colleague that rightfully emailed me and called me to the carpet because of a tweet that I liked that was connected to more national politics, but then also seemed to call them out implicitly. And so I say all that to say, and this connects to a second point I'm trying to make, is that I do think there is a room, and instead of us, I would push us, instead of us protecting our stance, to just try to see it from someone else's point of view. Because my initial thought when I first heard Jessica say that is like, wow, I didn't know that. And then the second thought was Jessica being sensitive here, transparently speaking? And then it was only when I reflected on those two experiences, I was like, yeah, that didn't feel great when I was in that seat. So maybe that's hopeful or it just belabors the point. I don't know. Second point I would just add is to this norm or recommendation around invite and valuing different opinions, understandings, and offerings. Again, I have, I guess, two examples. I really like that norm. I really want us to keep that. And I really want us to embody what that means, which I interpret that as we value and seek opportunities and seize possibilities to bring in like various perspectives, not more people or change people's opinions to fit our own. And Emily, I think we've come a long way. I think we can transparently speak. I don't want to be inappropriate, but I love Emily, and we get along great. I think we got off to a rocky start, and I think maybe I'll own it. I wasn't embodying that norm, and I've felt in other committee meetings as well as in board work that that norm has not always been embodied. So I just would push us to say, yes, it is okay to have intellectual exercises, but to value differing opinions is just that, to value them and not necessarily always to change them. So that's
a quick suggestion as well, that maybe this committee brings these norms to the full board as something that we remind each other, especially at working sessions, but at public meetings as well, that these are the meeting norms, and we can even have this as part of our regular intro thing. Is these are the norms of this meeting type thing, if it's something that the leadership is interested in, of course.
I would personally agree with that. I would say, and again, not attacking any of our colleagues, but the snarkiness that I have felt and that I think constituents and the public picks up on, one, is not healthy, but two, comes from this place, I think, of not valuing differing opinions. And so I think that would benefit us all. John Paul.
Agreed.
Ditto.
Okay. Is that a good segue, Zach?
Sure. Sorry, Emily.
No worries. No. I think
Thank you, Jessica, for bringing that up.
Yeah, it's like you unclogged something. So anyway, go on.
And I would just say, this isn't the first time I've heard Jessica say that, but it's the first time I've heard what she was saying in a way that I don't think I've heard before. Just wanted to put that out there. So thank you for constantly elevating that. All right. I don't know how much time we have here, Emily. I am not looking at the clock or the agenda, but I am just chatting out the resource, the equity framework resource. And I would say I'm going to be, my whole 2020 mantra is making the implicit explicit. And the implicit tension that I'm feeling now is that there's a tension I'm experiencing of this being a board driven initiative and us talking about it in the well-rounded education committee. I'm fine with doing that, but I just don't want people to think that they're excluded from these conversations. That said, I did want us to come back to the actual equity statement and see if we could spend maybe 10 minutes or so to kind of hammer out some of the edits. As I was saying in the meeting, the folk on this call are the ones that actually weighed in with feedback anyway, minus Frazier. And so I think it would be a good use of time. And then just as a reminder, I am sending, and the goal is to do it by end of the day, but you may get it in the morning in full transparency, just guidance on timelines, next steps, resources, and asks for you all as board members to take some of this to your constituents.
Can I ask you something, Zach? Would it make sense to actually go to the framework itself, that part of it, and look at that in the context of framing this meeting and then suggest edits that, like, does this work for what we are going to talk about, knowing what the agenda is? Would that make sense or not?
I'm not sure I understand your push there. I would say for everybody else, Emily and I discussed, like, why don't we try out like some of the proposals that we have and see how it might fit with this equity framework. I was just cutting that just because of time, Emily, but we could totally do that.
I was gonna cut the other part. But no, you do, this is your thing. You do it.
I just really value the feedback because, again, it takes the responsibility off of me to like make unilateral decisions, which I appreciate. So let's time clock this and go into 10:45. Is that okay? 15
Yep.
minutes, not 10, but okay. So I just chatted out the document, and I want to just start with Frazier's recommendation and hear you all's thoughts. And then if there are any other major changes that you propose, I would ask that we weigh in now. Again, this would just make my life easier so I don't have to make unilateral decisions. Frazier, as the comment here suggests, says that we should make the equity statement just this first section that ends with student, that's currently highlighted, and I'm highlighting now. And then he's saying everything beneath that we make part of like our framing for the equity framework. So I'll start there. What are your initial reactions, thoughts to that suggestion? And if there are others, I would love to hear those as well.
Well, the original is 3 paragraphs, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think this is maybe a little longer, but you just kind of pushed it all into 1 paragraph. I don't think it's that much more, right? Am I right about that?
I think part of Frazier's point was that although the 3 paragraph, one that came from the ESSA task force and was challenging to get to, let me say, it hit all of the points. I think the longer it is and the more detailed it is, the harder it is to actually use as a statement of like, this is what our beliefs are.
Yeah.
And so I see what Frazier is saying. I mean, I think, Emily, to your point, I would probably put a paragraph there and start the second paragraph on the next thing and just have those first 2 sentences as our first paragraph. And then have that as sort of the initial statement. But I mean, I don't
like that, John Paul.
Yeah. Just so there's a separation. I mean, because I am, especially now, but in general, like I am very much the next sentence to me is very important to me.
Yes. I agree. I agree. I think it connects to a lot of the discussions we're having, including our social studies work and our commitment to ensure that our standards are anti-racist in nature. And so I'm totally fine with putting a space if that would make it seem less overwhelming for folk. I would rather not delete it out, but also just wanted to honor Frazier's recommendation and get other people's thoughts.
Can I add one other suggestion?
Yeah.
What if we go back to making it sort of 3 mini paragraphs and then add one more paragraph before to ensure? Because then it's a statement, a call out of context, and a set of things that are student related.
So, just,
So-
yep.
Let's see if you can you see my yeah, right there.
Yep. So I made them into 3. So to ensure, so you're saying to build out the second blurb, the state board acknowledges part?
No, I'm saying to leave it exactly as it looks now, so that it's simply our initial statement of purpose, our call out of the context in which all this lives, and then a clear set of things that we are focused on for students.
Totally fine with that. Totally fine with that.
I like the visual clarity around what each piece does.
Yeah.
But I also like that we've got sort of 3 clear sections: a statement of purpose, where this lives in context, and what we're doing with respect to kids in schools.
Yeah, I do too. And I think that the 4 points in the 3rd paragraph are those are the actionable pieces, or they help, maybe not actionable, they're framers, right? They help to frame what we're doing. So
Kudos to Ruth for those, because that's largely her push. She forgot she actually recommended them. But I actually wanted to come back to those to say, like, are there any tweaks here in language or nuance or things we would add in that 3rd paragraph in particular?
Can I actually go back to the 1st paragraph?
Sure.
So in the 1st sentence, actually, something I get caught on is, you're not going to be surprised by this, but to reach and exceed common academic standards through high quality instruction. I guess I'm thinking about, this is a genuine question, actually. Are there students who cannot meet common academic standards, students with disabilities, or, yeah, I don't know. Like, does that leave some students out, actually? Is there a reason not to have that kind of language? So that's a genuine question, not a pushback, actually. And I don't know if.
I think I mean, everyone here, I think, would concede that there are some students that may have like cognitive issues that may preclude them from meeting certain benchmarks. That said, I would argue that that's a very small number. And what this statement is suggesting is not that there is just one standard, but that for all students in a given grade, or for all students that may have certain specifications in an IEP, that there is a common benchmark for those students, if that makes sense. Not that there is just one standard.
I don't think that's clear there, actually. So that's really good. Actually, that was a good clarification. I can take on playing with that to make that clear if you want, because I think that makes total sense, actually.
I would love that. And I would just say personally, and I know this isn't the committee for it, but that's part of my hesitation in our research committee with the conversations around growth is, again, I keep coming back to how is that not us setting a different benchmark for kids in Ward 8 from kids in Ward 1 from kids in Ward 5, for instance.
Yeah.
Not that that's our intention, but that's just how I see it. So I would love your thought partnership there.
Okay.
Okay, if there are no other thoughts here, I would love for us to zero in on that 3rd paragraph. I'll give everybody a second to look at it. Are these the right things? Are there things we would add to it or take away, tweak language? Ruth, are you trying to say something?
Okay.
Oh, we can't hear you. I'm sorry. Ruth, if you want, you could just call one of us. We could just put you on speakerphone.
So I'm working on some technical issues with Ruth. Her screen also went blank now. So she's losing all of the things together. So,
Wow.
but
It's to you though, Ruth. I would just say, Karen, Marcus, and I had our conversation with Paul Kine, and Karen was having similar issues, and I ended up having to call Karen on the speaker. So, the meeting,
And somehow her sound quality was better than all of ours.
yes, yes. Okay, sorry about that. So let's take a second to read that third paragraph, and then if there are any suggestions here, I would love to discuss them.
I was gonna say I haven't fully hashed out my thoughts on this, but I was thinking about in the second graph where we talk about kind of the impacts of racist policies. Are there a way to? I'm trying to think of a way to hone in on kind of like education related. So I know we put like unfair school funding practices. But I'm trying to flesh out in my mind that there are also, I'm sure, other education related ones that we're missing. Or I guess maybe we could say like school segregation. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, Marcus, I would add, Zachary and I both got tagged yesterday on a great article in Tolerance magazine about curriculum violence. Basically, the way in which curriculum is designed that implicitly forces students to take part in practices that are traumatizing. So, a lot of the things we've seen publicized in the past few years about how we teach slavery and the effort to create authentic learning experiences that are horrifying. So I do think that if we can find a broader way to say
Mm,
education practices,
yeah,
education funding, education structure.
yeah.
Do you all want to hammer that out now, or do you all want?
Can take a cut at some words while we keep just.
Yeah, that would be great. Hey, Mark, you'll notice I just fit in school segregation in there. I don't know
Yeah.
if where you wanted it, but that'd be helpful.
Oh yeah, I see that. Okay.
It also reads kind of clinky now, so yes, Jessica, I would appreciate
Yeah.
your eye on that.
so I've called Ruth now, so she should be able to hear through my speakerphone.
I can hear you jump off.
Okay, so Zachary, can
Can
you
other
talk?
people hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I can sort of hear you, so I'll just
Awesome.
here.
The show goes on. So, Ruth, we're still talking about the equity statement. Emily's gonna do some thinking around the first paragraph, in particular where it says common exceed or meet a common bar. I'm paraphrasing. Jessica's gonna take a stab, or maybe Jessica and Marcus, to think about like language in that second paragraph, inequities that exist. Marcus mentioned school segregation in particular. And Jessica was highlighting school or unjust school practices, if you will. And then I also wanted us to reflect on in our next 3 or 4 minutes the third paragraph to see if those are the only things. Will we add, take away, adjust, or tweak what's written there? In this third paragraph, I would take out and substantially hurt the educational experience of vulnerable students.
It's not necessary. I agree.
Yeah, I get it. I think it's just a bit redundant or not necessary. So thoughts there.
Yeah, I agree.
Ruth, are you good with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I recommended it originally to as a way of focusing what were the most important things, right? That's all, but it's not.
Well, actually, so disproportionately refers to it's out of proportion with maybe other students, and substantially is whether or not it's in relation to other students, it's substantive. So maybe it is, you know, it's adding something. It's not important. I feel like it could go either way. It would be all right.
I mean, it's a priority issue, but you know, we can use our, if people don't like it, we can use our judgment as well.
Okay.
Is hurt clear? Would hinder be more clear? When you say hurt, it's maybe brings to mind different things for different people, whereas hinder is more like it gets in the way of, right?
I actually like the word hurt in
Okay.
context, and the reason being is it has all those other contexts, right? That it is a painful thing. It is not just like
It is, yeah.
you know, a tree root when you're running a 5K, right? Like it is a painful thing that happens.
Maybe it disproportionately hurts and hinders the educational experience. But maybe not necessary. I don't know. Just thinking out loud.
I've been trying to find the strike through feature, but I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. Hurts and
I
hinders.
think we have about another minute, Zach, just saying.
Okay, so Jessica, Marcus, and then Emily, feel free to just drop it in here, and then whatever you capture, I'll just wrap up in my follow-up with the board.
I will do it today. I'm not going to do it during the meeting.
When you get a chance, just give us access and then we'll get on it.
My bad. Yep, I'll do that right now.
The only other thing I wanted to say, just based on the meeting comments, the idea of using the statement and using the framework. When I was first teaching, we were starting KIP LA Prep as a brand new school. We talked about the concept of the mission filter. So using our mission statement to filter through decisions about what curricular choices or who we invited to events or failed to invite to events, or how we were making hiring decisions, or what field trips we chose. So I think it might be helpful as we move forward in this discussion and think about using it, to consider this as a filter for us, and to have some sort of collective discussion, maybe at the retreat, about what is the purpose of a mission filter and how might this be the filter that the state board uses to decide about priorities. I loved your point, Zachary, about like who we invite to participate. But that really resonated for me, and I wasn't sure how many other folks had experienced this concept of mission filter. So it really spoke to me in that way.
Yeah, and I think this is what I meant when I was saying we should use this to frame our discussions going forward. And I will just say that, yeah, at Mission Hill School, we started most meetings by rereading our mission statement. Sometimes it was directly relevant to what we were talking about, but sometimes it was just to remind ourselves, like to ground ourselves in why we're here, right? And some common understanding of how we are framing our discussion going forward. So I think it's a really valuable thing to do. It makes, you know, every organization has a mission statement, and now it seems like every organization has an equity statement, which is not a bad thing, but it is not a good thing when it's not a living document, I would say. So I wholeheartedly agree with that, Jessica.
That's exactly the goal. The end goal is that we can use this as a filter, which ideally puts equity at the center of all of our decisions and takes out a level of subjectivity in what we decide to put forth, vote on, not vote on, etc. So back over to you, Emily.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Zach.
Sorry, last thing. You should have access now. If not, let me know. Okay, great.
Okay. Okay, so why don't we all go back over to the shared document? Because that's, I think everything should be there, most everything anyway. Let me get rid of this, sorry. Okay. Okay. So as I mentioned that, or we all talked about at the last meeting, that it would be good to sort of revisit the definition that we had of well-rounded education and really revisit everything that we're doing, obviously, both because we've lost funding and because we're in this very different context right now. And so one thought was that a way to get input quickly on some ways that we might flesh out the definition would be to get input from our student advisory committee. So Alex, Drew, and I created a survey, and 8 of the 20 students filled it out. So we did get some feedback, not a ton. What was surprising was just to remind you that our original definition really just focused on how much time schools spent on non-tested, or in the case of science, less tested subjects. And so I put that on the survey and asked if this was a sufficient, or if this, jibed with what they thought a well-rounded education was. And all but 2 of them said yes. So that was interesting. But the 2 who said no gave useful additions. And so I added those in. And one was they thought that it should include something about real world learning. And the other one suggested that a well-rounded education, and this is very relevant to what we were just talking about, should always include some aspect of multicultural. They used the word multiculturalism, so I translated that as culturally relevant teaching. So you should see the new draft. I'm just going over to it now. At the top of that page under the norms. So any thoughts on that? Does anybody want to read it? Why don't we read it out loud? I can't see. Marcus, why don't you read it?
Give me 1 second. I was distracted by something that just came through.
I know, I was calling you out. No, just kidding. I didn't really know that.
I felt like I was in class, like.
I know. Marcus, bachelor, please read.
Now I'm trying to find the doc in all of my tabs. Somebody please go and say.
Okay, I'll read it. Okay, for research and support purposes, we define well-rounded education as time spent on teaching non-tested or less frequently tested subjects, including humanities, science, and art. A well-rounded education involves real-world learning and culturally relevant teaching practices and provides students with the social emotional support they need to thrive in school and beyond.
I think it's a strong draft. Not surprising. My only issue is around this non-testing focus. And so in DC, that would mean we're not talking about math, ELA, or science. And I get the spirit, or what the spirit is that there's been too much emphasis only on primarily math and ELA. But I just a better way to say that without saying non-tested, if possible.
Yeah, I would like to have a positive instead. It's sort of a negative in it. It's like defining it as what it's not.
Yeah.
So there's a way, maybe it is just taking that out and saying, we define well-rounded education as time spent on humanities, science, and art, and other subjects that are often, I don't know, marginalized.
Conveying that it's time spent the full breadth of learning. This isn't what I'm suggesting, but the full breadth of learning, including these courses that you might list out, and not only limiting that to heavily tested areas like math and ELA. I guess my concern is, I think math, ELA, and science are part of a well-rounded education, and I wouldn't want to send the message that everything but those 3 areas is how we're defining well-rounded education.
I wonder about using the word balanced somewhere. Because I agree with Zachary that I think we don't want to exclude ELA and math as parts of a well-rounded education. For me, the concept of well-rounded education is what we have now is lopsided education. It is math ELA heavy and everything else is light. And I think what we're looking for is balance, where a valued part of every school day would be math and ELA and science and social studies and a special, whether it be art or language or music or movement, dance or whatever. So I don't know how to work that in wordsmithing, but I think the idea of a balanced plate of educational opportunity each and every day.
And I would
I like that a lot. Balance is everything, really. Yeah, no, I think
strive for it and I'm terrible at it, but
no, it's
that
huge.
as well. And I would just emphasize that it's balance over the course of a student's learning trajectory, not necessarily every year. So a student might not have all of these options this year, but maybe between grades 5 through 8, they are experiencing these different courses. And then the second thing I would just say that what's missing here. I know we highlight culturally relevant. Where's the document? We call out culturally relevant teaching practices. However, we don't seem to include culturally relevant course topics, whether that's FM studies, Latin studies, I don't know, in our understanding of what a well-rounded education is.
Yeah. So it's the offerings as well as how they're taught, like what's within each, right? Am I interpreting that right?
So are we talking about on the culturally relevant course offerings? Are we talking about the potential of exploring making requirements for those types of things, or are we thinking about just what is the practical application, right? Like I think there's certainly some.
I think it's the latter.
Going on with the social studies committee too, and like how do we make the lessons, the culturally relevant throughout the entire educational model. But I think there's, we should be cognizant of there are multiple levels of how we would approach this situation, not just in teaching practices, but I think you're right in terms of like course offerings, but also educational standards as well, that they are relevant, and then how that works, while also then maintaining the flexibility and independence of our LEAs to make those determinations for themselves.
I love that point and push, and I think your two options, I'm leaning more towards the latter. I wasn't necessarily thinking we would suggest or recommend that there is a requirement, but more so to say if we're calling out subjects including humanities, science, and art, that we're saying that we're covering those topics with a full understanding of various cultures and people's contributions to those areas versus what we've heard from our students in our social studies standards, a very narrow view of what that might include, if that makes sense.
Speaking of narrow view of what that might include, is it worth adding a line about well-rounded education also meaning a diversity of options? And I think about, right, students around the city who will say, well, my school is small, and so even though I want to take Latin or French, right, the only class I have to take is Spanish, or right, or I want to, I played an instrument in middle school and I want to go to this high school, but all they have is keyboarding, but I play the saxophone, sort of those things I think also define.
I think so, Mark. The conversation I have with folks in Ward 6, like everyone loves Eastern High School's marching band, but only one of middle schools has instrumental music.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's got 3 feeder middle schools, but only one of them has instrumental music. But Eastern's band is like the center point of the music program. And so having that diversity of options, if I'm at Hobson, Jefferson, or Elliott Hine.
Right. So I think that also, if I'm hearing this correctly, that it connects to the course offerings That it's not just about how you do it, but it's also what is available, right?
Can I break in? I want to make sure that Ruth has an opportunity. It's
Yes, sorry, thank you.
Ruth, go ahead. Ruth?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, all right. So going back probably 5 minutes, I just wanted to say on the definition of the well-rounded, another way to do it is to talk about the subjects that have to do with building background knowledge, the sort of the knowledge subjects and the skill subjects, and that might be a way to talk about it. And then one thing, I don't agree with Zachary, if I understood him correctly, that it would be okay in some years to be very unbalanced and in other years not. I think I disagree with that, but regardless of disagreeing or not, I think that's too narrow to get into the statement. I would just sort of talk about we want balance. And on the diversity of that's all. I mean, on the diversity of options, the only thing I would say is in this city, it becomes so complicated by school size. And how do you deal with that, right? It starts to be how to organize your school. And it might be that we want it to be in the statement, talk generally about it, and then think about how we
Yeah, I do.
address that in the.
I think, and you can push back on this if you don't agree. My thought is that the statement is kind of a, what do you say? It's what we want, right? What's the word I'm looking for?
Aspirational.
Oh, thank you. That's what I'm looking for. Yeah. It's what we would hope for, because I think that's how we sort of then. I got a fortune yesterday, a fortune cookie. It said, when your values are clear, your decisions are easier. I was like, yeah, that's so true. And so I think this is a way of sort of helping us with our decision making, is clarifying our values, at least around it. It doesn't have to necessarily be realistic in the present. It's what we're working towards, right? So yeah, I guess it is the ideal. I would push back on your comment, Ruth, a little bit about the background knowledge, just because it puts it all in the context of being a vehicle for improving literacy, which isn't horrible. I mean, that's important. It's important. But I think that when we talk about well-rounded education, we're talking about meeting the needs of the whole child, right? Like the whole child comes to school. And when we don't acknowledge that, and when we don't have programming that meets the needs of the whole child, I think that's problematic on its own. Like, it's not just about the fact that they also don't build background knowledge. I feel like that's another part of the problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it might be that you want to. I'm just thinking about if we use the term balance in terms of what. So on the subject, I don't disagree with you. On the subjects, maybe it's about the background knowledge, but it's also about the whole child. There's sort of different facets of it. Anyway, it's not a. Okay.
Well, I'm capturing everything you're saying, and Marcus and I are going to tinker with this, and we will bring it back again. I do, for time's sake, want to move on unless there was any other burning thoughts, brilliant thoughts. Unless it's brilliant, I don't want to hear it. So, okay, moving on. Just kidding. Okay. Sorry, I'm kind of moving between documents here. So the other piece that I was trying to kind of take everything that came up at our last meeting and create something cohesive so that we can move towards something actionable, right? And so one thing that we talked about last time was, since we can't do our survey, the all teacher survey, in anytime soon. What should we be doing instead, and how can we sort of change our work to meet sort of the needs of this moment, right? And so one thing we talked about was partnering. And as I dug into that, I was having a hard time thinking about what that actually looked like. So I've shifted it somewhat to be more about reaching out to various organizations, stakeholders, individual schools that are doing work that I think centers well-rounded education in some way, and using them as resources to then help us create a document or a resource of some kind that actually is useful to schools, to stakeholders who are trying to do more in this vein, right? But to make that really grounded in the actual needs of and the actual experiences in this time of distance learning of the folks who are doing this work, the students who are experiencing, you know, this new kind of teaching. So this next list here that says gather input from and possibly partner with relevant LEAs, orgs, agencies, etc. My thought with this is that perhaps we could split this up and start reaching out to, you know, to the individuals who are the chairs of these departments or who are the heads of these organizations. And then, of course, we could all reach out to stakeholders in our own wards. And that going down a little further where it says common questions, that it would be good to have some common questions that we're asking. Of course, they differ a little depending on what kind of organization it is or what kind of stakeholder we're talking to. So this is just, again, all of this is just draft, and I invite you to add or change. But and then I started to create a resource list. And haven't worked on this yet, the recommendations for schools, but kind of just made some categories. So I'm going to stop there. I feel like I just kind of threw a lot at the wall, but thoughts on that?
To make sure I'm clear, the idea is that we would seek input from these stakeholders, partners around like what's happening leading into the fall in connection to our ideas of well-rounded education.
I think it's both. So actually, it's both finding out what happened this last school year. So one of the things we talked about was trying to learn what worked well actually during distance learning and sort of maybe collecting some best practices. And specifically within the context of well-rounded education. And I did start to do that. I actually did have I tested these questions out on Jim Reese from DC Project Zero. And so I put his recommendations down at the bottom. And then also from the students, from the Student Advisory Board, their recommendations. So it could be both sort of collecting that and hearing also what didn't work well, what the needs were, what resources people feel like they need or want going forward. But also, yeah, definitely understanding.
We would do what with that information?
Well, that's what I'm proposing is that we start grounding our work in sort of what is already happening, right? Or what, yeah. So that we would create something. I think we talked about creating some document that has actually two purposes, right? We create a document or we What was that?
Jessica was admiring my.
Private chatted him. I was like, "You're wearing a Park Wars shirt? Where is that from? That's kind of
I know Emily's like, no, Park Wars.
I totally didn't notice that. Anyway, I'm going to ignore that.
we gotta have some fun with,
Emily, no, that's all really helpful. What I was trying to get at is I know there's just a lot of asks on board members to do reach out to constituents. And could we use our committee meeting as an opportunity to invite people in to get some of this feedback?
Yes, exactly. So that's the other thing I
Yeah.
would suggest. Thank you. Yeah.
Less efficient, but it could be like, can we narrow this list down to 3 to 5 people and invite them in versus asking board members yet again to kind of do reach out to folks.
Right. I think it's both the board members are exhausted and I think everybody is exhausted, right? Like, I think we have to be really careful about what we're asking, going out and asking for, because everybody's getting requests, right?
Yeah.
So I agree with that. And a thought I had was maybe I don't know, I think we can get creative with this. Like, maybe part of it is there are organizations that do this work, Transcend and Project Zero and DC Arts, and Smithsonian is doing a lot of work with schools now. Could we have panels or like town halls where they are speaking about what they are doing, what their ideas are for innovating in this moment and making sure that students get a well-rounded education? I think there's a lot of anxiety right now around students just, catching up with what is considered core academics. And I think it's important to keep I mean, if our vision is that balance is maintained even in this time of great unbalance, right? Imbalance, that it's important to kind of keep it in people's minds. And so one way to do that would be to have folks who are actually doing this this is what they do and they do it well, showing what's possible, right?
No, I totally agree. And I think just tailoring that question around, like, how are you providing well-rounded education or resources during distance learning may make the question even more relevant for what schools are going through. And I would imagine would I know a lot of school leaders to lean in, because I don't think anybody's against the idea of providing a well-rounded education. From what I gather, it's often like limited resources, limited capacity, limited time, and limitations in general. And so, yeah, just my 2 cents. I like the idea. I would just say framing it around distance learning might get us more traction.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? So I think, and I texted with John Paul a little bit about this last night because I knew I was going to get the question at an ANC meeting. Ossie talked about these distance learning plans that LEAs were sharing with them. And John Paul, do I understand that they're to be on Ossie's website by the end of June?
That is what they have told us, yes.
So I think something that might be neat is sort of pairing together these two ideas. Like, maybe we could take on the scanning the LEA plans and finding what's in them and where well-rounded seems to show up more versus less, while inviting in panels of folks who do this work with schools to say, here's the opportunities we offer, here's what's happening in schools in DC that we're working with, and sort of we can perhaps compare and contrast those, like places that Transcend is working with where this is happening, LEA plans where we see great things happening, and questions we have about where things maybe seem out of balance. What are the barriers that are leading to that lack of balance? To Zachary's point, is that a lack of resources? Is it, one thing I'm really curious about for the fall is which teachers will want to be back in person versus which teachers have childcare troubles, how that will be this other, outside factor that impacts schools' ability to do different things. Like, if my Spanish teacher and my art teacher both have young children and no childcare, that affects my ability to offer Spanish and art, even if I'm a school that really wants to do it.
Yeah.
So
No,
I think maybe taking extant data and inviting in experts who do it already with schools would be a nice paired activity.
Love that. Love that. As long as we frame it around or frame it in assets-based ways, so we're not saying these schools didn't do this.
Yeah,
not at all.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's highlight these schools that are doing it. Yeah.
I'm all getting the bright spots. Love the bright spots.
John Paul, Marcus, Ruth, just a quick thing about the distance learning plans. Something I wanted to ask that I didn't was just around, like, is there a commitment to upload those plans on an ongoing basis? And so I would imagine the plans that are going to be uploaded by the end of June are going to be outdated sooner rather than later. And so just what commitment there might be. So just throwing that out there for your upcoming conversations. Wow.
I mean, I think it's very possible that these will be updated at some point, but I think it's also pretty challenging for any LEA to actually have a distance learning plan that's not full of lots of variables, right? Like, I think it's going to have to be a, well, we'll see when we get there type plan, and so I want to recognize that piece of it too. And we don't know yet, like, what type of detail that we're going to be able to look into these plans and see all these items that relate to the well-rounded education, right? Like, we don't know how detailed they're actually going to be or how they're going to do that, but I do think collecting them and putting them all sort of like in a chart type thing would be helpful, similar to like what the Office of Student Advocate did on the COVID plans, which was really helpful. I mean, the staff can certainly, you know, collate them in and maybe create like a, not necessarily a check mark sheet, but like, you know, when we review them for X factor, is it there? Yes, no, you know, that type of thing. We can probably examine some of that information as well.
Yeah. I think one of the other things we talked about at our last meeting was, are there ways that we can use this, whether this is a town hall panel or a document of some kind, to highlight that we have our fingers on the pulse of what's happening in our wards, that we are, you know, a resource ourselves because we are closest to our, you know, direct stakeholders in our schools. And so it's just something I don't have more than that right now to offer, but it's something sort of to keep in mind as we do this work, that I think we are so often overlooked. And I think if we can, again, frame it in the positive of like, we have this really unique information, knowledge base to offer. And I think we need to show it more though. So if there's ways that we can show it, I think that would be really beneficial. So I'm looking at the time, and I think that what I hear is that folks are on board with maybe reaching out, figuring out who would make the most sense to reach out to and engage around both collecting information for resource, like a resource list, and also maybe participating in a panel. Is that true? Okay,
And
great.
panel, are you referencing like a committee meeting or a board meeting?
I think so. It could be that, you know, we've had folks come to our committee meetings before just to talk with us, to inform us. So I think we could do that to help us create the document. I think we could decide from there if it would make sense then to have a more public facing event that we advertise as such, you know, that we advertise as like, the SBOE is sponsoring a town hall on well-rounded education with, you know, Mary Lambert and from DCPS and you know, Jim Reese from Project Zero and blah, 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 like the folks who are doing this work, right? Thank you, Frankie. So that's my thought with that. Any other brilliant ideas before we move on? Or questions or thoughts?
Just to be clear on next steps, if we were to do that, let's say in our next month's committee meeting, we'll align on those people by end of next week to be able to invite them.
Yeah, what I'll do is, so you guys have access to this document, and you see the list there, and I've highlighted folks I've already started to reach out to. But maybe if you do the same, like highlight who you would like to, or add folks you would like to reach out to, that would be good. Or if folks have ideas of like how to make this more cohesive, I'm totally open to that. I sort of just, brainstormed ideas of who's out there. I didn't really think about, is this a balanced list, to use that word? Like, does it hit all of the areas that we're hoping to hit? So that we might want to look at it for that, like what's missing. Is there enough representation in terms of cell? Is there enough representation in terms of culturally relevant pedagogy? Probably not, right? So that might be something to do. So let's say that by next meeting, we have all taken a look at this list, added anything you wanted to add, and I will reach out to you personally and sort of ask what your thoughts are on who you're reaching out to if I don't see it marked on the document. I will hold you accountable. How about that?
Good luck.
Thanks. Okay. So the other thing that I wanted to bring up is that I think I had mentioned that that OSSI, I had been working on the what's it called, environmental literacy plan working group with OSSI, and they've sort of dropped out. I think they're busy with other stuff right now. So we haven't met in a long time. But last decision that we made as a board was that we would partner with them on creating a crosswalk between the science standards and existing curriculum in early childhood science. So it's kind of a, I don't know, I don't want to say busy work. It's not, it's important, but it's not very bold, right? So one thing I just want to put out there that we may want to think about, Darren actually sent me an article about New Jersey passing incorporating climate change in their standards, their science standards across grades and across subjects, I think, right? Is that right, Darren? Yeah, which is bold, right? And, one thing that I'm thinking about right now with distance learning, two things is, it is an opportunity to think differently about teaching and learning. And maybe we do want to be more bold around what we do. I don't know if we have the capacity for it, but I do just want to put it out there as something to think about. Do we want to think more about what should be in the standards related to climate change, because it is as pressing as issues related to racial equity right now. So that's one thing. Maybe it's something we start really thinking about more seriously in 2 meetings from now, I don't know, in the fall. But the other thing to think about maybe more immediately is sort of the real world learning piece. I think is connected to that. And to what extent can we start thinking about incorporating real problem solving, students engaging in real problem solving into distance learning? That students are helping to solve these huge problems that we are facing right now, and that they get credit for doing that. that somehow it's part of the curriculum. And I know that there's curriculum out there that facilitates that. And is there a way that we as a board could start digging into that and sort of making recommendations? Again, this is sort of long view. But I just think we are in a moment where people are looking for ways to improve that are really different, that are departures, right? So it's an opportunity, is all I'm saying. And I think, Ruth, you shared a while ago an article about middle school students who were engaged early on in this crisis to help with IT, and that they got credit for that, I think. So that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking about, but also, you know, like students really coming up with a plan for addressing climate change. It may not be a realistic one, but that's what they're putting their mind to. And then they're doing research based on, you know, real facts. So any thoughts on that? And Ruth, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting that you are there and can't immediately respond. So did you want to say anything about anything that we've talked about so far? Okay. Anybody else?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yeah.
can see you now.
Yeah, no, it's very hard. So when I'm trying to follow it, and I did just put a note in there that, yes, I heard that, I'll try to find it. So, no, I'm not participating as much as I normally would, as people might have noticed, but I'm catching it and trying my best to follow along.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Any thoughts?
There's a fire truck I think going by, but there we go. So I did drop a link to, and I think a little bit of what you're talking about, and this is happening in the micro, but I dropped a link for in the doc for the School for Ethics and Global Leadership that does like this project-based kind of social impact model where they bring in like decision makers, former secretaries of state, and when I went, they brought in like Mayor Fenty and like all of these like decision makers, and they students engage directly and then come up with a like with a social impact project to help address some of those issues. So that might be a good model to look at, while also doing their like traditional 11th grade curriculum, but like weaving the ethics and like global leadership stuff in, which is interesting.
So I guess what I would ask is, can we just start collecting examples of that and maybe putting them in this shared document? We'll make another heading down at the bottom of like real world learning examples, and you know, for future discussions, I think to make it real, it would be good again to see what's already happening and what's, you know, looking at other examples like New Jersey, what they've done, and is that something that we would like to pursue? What would it take? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I also dropped in a link for Living Classrooms at Kingman, which is also doing some really good work with students around environmentalism as well. So I think those are really two really good, strong examples of that.
I don't see your.
I think I dropped them under the
Living classrooms link.
yeah, under the gather input from. So maybe that does need to be
Oh,
moved.
I'm sorry. You're on. I thought you put it in the chat. Okay, great. No, that makes sense. Thanks, Marcus. All right, are we at time? We have 4 minutes. So in those 4 minutes, Zach, I'm sorry, did you? Let me just see. I guess the only other question I had for you, we had on our agenda last time to look at the questions for the all teacher survey and see about making them relevant to the current situation and maybe making them relevant to the full range of grades. I'm just wondering if that still feels like something we want to do right now. And I can share the link to that, what we have. right now. And since we only have like 3 minutes, I don't know if we can answer that question, but I think we can look at it after the meeting maybe, and just make a decision at the next meeting about what we want to do around that. Do we want to just table it for now? Or is this something we want to have ready for when we do have money again? Ruth, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that we should probably wait just a bit. I mean, in a month we'll know where we are in terms of our budget. So I think that doesn't make sense to go too far down that road until we know that the money won't even show up until October 1st. So there'll be plenty of time. Although I hope we get it, because I think it would be great.
Yeah. All right. So we will table it for now, and we will revisit it at our next meeting with the same question, I guess. Zach, did you want to give an update in 2 minutes or less on standards?
No major updates to give. Again, the idea though is that whenever we can resume our school visits, that we begin incorporating a way to collect student work, to do this work alongside school teams, and maybe that could be a value add to schools we visit, to say, hey, members of the board and others will review student work with you to elevate ideas. I don't know. So more to come on that in the fall.
Great. Thank you.
And loves that idea.
Yay. That's a good way to end. Good note to end on. So I think I will count on Darren and Caitlin to give us our synopsis of what our next steps are, since we're sort of out of time now. But I am also going to gosh, I've been having word retrieval problems lately. I don't know what it is. Anyway, I will follow up with you guys about next steps as well. But you have access to this document. So I just encourage you to look it over. If there are things that don't make sense to you, to reach out. But I try to kind of make it a flow, actually, like one thing leads to another, like they're all connected. And that the ultimate goal is that we come up with something that we can share with the public that really shows our value and that is actually valuable. All right. Thank you all for your time and for your honesty. And I look forward to seeing you again. Have a great weekend.
Enjoy your weekend, everybody, in Park Wars.
Yeah.